Yo, so I'm back. That was quick. It's definitely the first time that I've immediately uploaded something after something else where the second thing was at least marginally related to what came before it. But I worked on that nerd culture video for like weeks, like longer than I would have preferred, as I talked about in the description for said video, but I actually managed to go out and watch Ready Player One, finally, with a friend of mine last night. So without getting too fancy with the editing or the presentation, I just thought I'd give my initial impressions of the film. I think just given the conversational climate around the film, this was gonna be disappointing in two ways. And that's not to say it's bad. I don't think it's bad at all. It's just that if you followed its reception pre-release on Twitter and the like, there were a bunch of people who wanted to go in wanting it to be the greatest thing ever made, just given that there's so much recognizable shit from their childhood that they would see in it. And then you had the people who, mostly having familiarized themselves with the book and whatever Mimi crap was in there, they wanted this to be the kind of movie where they could go in and just like jaw drop at every other line and every other like pop culture reference that was thrown into it. But yeah, if you went in hoping for either of those, it's not going to quite live up to any of those expectations. And, you know, at the end of the day, I don't think that's particularly fair to the movie and, you know, the hundreds or thousands of people who worked on it. Because you look at the marketing, you look at the conversation around it, and it's just this circus, the final product for which was never going to satisfy anyone's itching for something orgasmically good or something that's so cringy you could watch it with a bunch of friends and be like, ah, look how fucking horrible this fucking movie is. Don't show the logo. Let's start with the shit I liked. Like I predicted, the production was pretty rock solid. I think the movie had a really good look. It had a really good feel. It had a very fun aesthetic that does the subject matter justice in terms of just eye candy and sound design and music and, you know, fun. Blockbuster fun. In regards to the pop culture references, they were definitely in there a lot, but thankfully there weren't that many moments where it got so distracting that it would like T-bone my experience. I mean, moments like that were definitely in there, but luckily they were oh so brief. And the movie itself actually did a pretty good job of demonstrating a self-awareness in regards to knowing a lot of trivial knowledge about movies and games and whatnot. There's this element of mystery to the plot where they're trying to like find all these clues to find the Easter egg that's hinted at in the trailer. And the main characters have like a wealth of knowledge of just otherwise useless information because, you know, this is made by a fanboy Dudo who happens to be very fascinated with that sort of thing. So this was his opportunity to make all those trivial knowings useful to a narrative of some kind, which is, you know, it is what it is for better and worse. And just the fact that there were several jokes where people would really get indulgent with how much of that stuff that they knew that they would either get cut off or like brushed to the side just to get back to progressing the plot. And that does speak to Spielberg's goal to make something that's accessible for everyone, while those who are familiar with that sort of subject matter are going to get like a little kick, a little bonus to be like, ah, that's something I know. That's literally what any pop cultural reference in anything is. Again, though, I just think the timing of this thing, the fact that there was so much of a movement behind it to like pick on that aspect of it in particular. I hate to keep coming back to that, but yeah, I think if your perception of what this thing's going to be is that tainted by those exterior elements, it is going to unfortunately dampen whatever fun time you otherwise would have had. The acting across the board is pretty strong. The two leads in particular have great chemistry. They're very charismatic. Artemis's character was definitely the strongest and the most engaging. I really like the dynamic of someone who's simultaneously living in the virtual world and the real world, trying to make a difference of some kind sociologically. She's just one of those strong, concrete characters who's easy to root for, and it's refreshing to see something that's handled that well in a movie like this. Because for all the gripes I have with the movie, and I'll get to those in a little bit, it is just further proof that just because something is populist, just because something has a lot of money put into it for the sole purpose of getting a return on it, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have dog shit characterizations like you saw in the Transformers movies, especially the sequels. Like I don't care for Megan Fox or whichever other placeholder actresses they got to fill those spaces in those films. But I think more the problem had to do with the fact that they were just hollow, like, objects of characters. They were really just there to satiate the little boys in the audience, and it didn't really work on me. She's not really my type. I would say Artemis is more my type, but I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, otherwise I'll Start sounding like somebody. I might dedicate a video to that after I record this, now that I think about it, but I'll keep that a surprise. So yeah, 2 strong leads. The supporting cast, not anything spectacular, but nothing cringy either. I mean, even some of the younger actors that are in the film, like, they do their job. They're about as good as some of the child actors from the Spielberg era this film's clearly trying to pay homage to. It's really when we start talking about the A-list top-tier actors where the highlights start to really jump out. Ben Mendelsohn, he's so good at playing villains. It doesn't even matter which kind. He was one of the stronger elements of Rogue One, just like a mustache-twirling, posh space Nazi. And in this one, he plays like a similarly conniving, but not quite as pure evil, just corporate monolith of a character. A guy who's clearly about the bottom dollar, a guy who's clearly trying to get ahead with his position of power, and a guy who is, at the end of the day, as he's admitting multiple times throughout the film, he's a businessman. So he's willing to appeal to people's interests and passions in order to get what he wants. One of the best parts of the movie actually involves him trying to pander to the main character by referencing a bunch of movies that he knows he likes. But the twist is he's got an earpiece with some Melvin in another room trying to feed him information. And that is one of the best parts of the movie because it demonstrates a self-awareness, a knowing that it's super easy to pander to one's own back knowledge of movies and games, comics, and all that. Without those scenes, this movie would have seemed much more like what people were afraid it's going to be, you know, just a big old nerd circle jerk. And it is still kind of that to an extent. It's just, it's not quite as cringy, not quite as cynically produced as, you know, something like this easily could have been and has been. Pixels. And then you've got Rylance, whose first name I just keep struggling to remember. Mark Rylance. Yeah, he's not in the movie very much. He plays the inventor character, the creator of the Oasis, the virtual world. I'm gonna, and here we are again. House phones interrupting my... Come from Randy. Oh, really? The Randy? Meet me, Randy. That's not a person. That's binary. Is it over? I think it's over. Back to my thoughts. No, Mark Rylance is excellent in this movie, and he's an interesting role to talk about because for those of you who don't know, when Spielberg was doing initial casting for this film, he really wanted to get Gene Wilder to play the creator of the Oasis. You know, like as every basic review of the book or the film has said, it's basically Willy Wonka meets the Matrix, which, you know, on the nose and indicative of just how original this story might be. Nonetheless, it's apt, and the idea of getting the actor who played Willy Wonka to reprise that kind of role would have been a pretty inspired choice on Spielberg's part. But unfortunately, Gene Wilder passed away not too long ago, so never got a chance to play this role. But keeping that in mind, if you watch even just the trailer of this film, you can see that Rylance is trying to essentially get the essence of Wilder. It's not quite an impersonation. There's definitely some quirks that are very specific to this role. This introverted old man who's trying to escape his real world insecurities by creating a fantasy world. Really, it's kind of like Willy Wonka if you gene spliced him with Garth from Wayne's World. Like, he's not quite as nutty and like quirky as Garth, but it's very uncomfortable, like charmingly uncomfortable. It's a guy who clearly just doesn't have that much social capital personality-wise, but he's still an endearing summation of someone who just can't hang in the real world. Rylance definitely is a talent, though. This is just further proof that you can put him in anything and he'll give a knockout performance. Loved him in Dunkirk. It was very nuanced and quiet and realistic. And this one similarly so, even if he's technically playing a geekier type of role. So between Mendelsohn and Rylance, this whole movie gets elevated to a level that I don't think it would have been in had they not been in it. You've also got Simon Pegg playing an American, which is a real treat, a real novelty. He's not in it that much, but in hindsight, he has such a 70s genre face. I don't know if that's offensive or not, so I apologize if it is. But yeah, give him a 70s haircut and suddenly, yeah, he could have played the older nice guy role in a previous life in like a Spielberg movie. He's good. It's a small role. So yeah, solid acting, really cool design choices, pop cultural elements that aren't quite as intrusive as one would fear for something like this. But let's talk about the things that aren't so great. The pacing, kind of whack, especially at the beginning. For a movie that's 2 hours and 20 minutes, you'd think there'd be a little more world building than there was in this thing. And, you know, there is world building. They do try to explain how the Oasis works and the economy in the real world in a world where the Oasis exists. But the first 10 minutes, it's just like voiceovers, like, I'm just a wannabe 80s protag, and this is the world that I live in. We have no more places to go in the real world. The only progress we can make is in here. Like, it's just that for longer than needed. And the voiceover does feel a little tacked on and lazy, just in terms of building up your exposition. Like, honestly, I can't think of too many ways to get around that other than just making it a bit more slow burn, a bit more mature, a bit more subtle with how it introduces you to everything. This is very by the numbers, kind of like kids filmy in terms of how it introduces everything to you. And you could argue, yeah, it is for kids. This video games, virtual world, it is kind of for kids. Like, there's some adult language awkwardly sprinkled throughout just to like give the impression that this is also made for adults, but it's Spielberg. He's always been known for appealing to the kid in everyone, for better and worse. They do a lot of time skips, which, all right, if you're gonna adapt a book, I'm sure there's like just chunks of time that you're going to eliminate from the narrative. But I don't know, I think it would have benefited overall from just slowing down a bit. It starts to really ramp up and get focused in the second half, thankfully, once the essential team of heroes is established, which is also brushed over like to an annoying degree. Like, there's these really likable side characters in addition to the two leads, and it reaches this point where there's a crossover into the real world where they're no longer communicating through the game, they're actually communicating in real life. And there's just this huge gaping hole where you're not really sure how these people would have been found or how they would have known where to go or where to find each other. It's just, I don't know, it's just beyond the grasp of the suspension of disbelief. And it's like, it's a good, rollicking, good time, let's stop the establishment type of film, which is fine. It's just when there's so much information being relayed in such a short amount of time and there's so much happening, it just starts to get a little exhausting and convoluted. The writing at times is also just awful. Luckily, the actors are talented enough to kind of give it this heft, this layer of likability, even though there's some real clunkers in this thing. Like, without giving too much away, one of the characters totally holds a guy by gunpoint and says, "You killed my mother's sister." Which, that's so... You definitely said aunt earlier. It's such a small thing, but it does kind of sum up the nature of some of the bad lines. It's just, it's not necessarily wrong. It's not that you can't say that with deliberateness. It's just that there's other quicker, more normal ways to say things that just aren't said. And then it does unfortunately bleed into some of the pop cultural references. Like, there's a part towards the end where like all the flagship characters start making their cameos, and it's just the right amount of screen time, as I said. But the way the characters acknowledge these things sometimes gets a little obnoxious, a little sitcom-y. On an episode of Sleepycast from a few years ago, there was a pet peeve that I think it was Johnny Utah brought up that just opened my eyes to a whole genre of pop cultural storytelling, namely when shows like Family Guy or The Simpsons, when they have a celebrity cameo, they have to turn to that person and be like, "Celebrity's name." Ever since I heard that, like, I have new standards for something as mundane and trivial as acknowledging a pre-existing property colliding with yours. Like, you look up and you're like, "Mechagodzilla." Ah, don't say it like that. Like, these are already the kinds of characters who can have that Whedon-esque interplay with each other, where there's a level of, like, shrugginess and playfulness. They've already demonstrated they can do that several times throughout the movie. So now that we're getting to the major set piece at the end, you're really gonna look at it and be like, "Thing that I know." Like, this could just come down to preference, but I think something like that would have been much more endearing if you're driving at that thing and you look up, you're like, "Is that Mechagodzilla?" Yeah, we're boned. Like, something that small can draw so much less attention to the fact that there's a bunch of recognizable shit in your film. So I think if they had gone more for that angle, granted, if they did it once every 5 minutes, yeah, it would have gotten just as annoying probably, but it wouldn't have been quite as grating. So I could go on, but I don't want to go too far into like spoiler territory. I'll say this. I would say this film's like a strong 6, maybe an oh-so-light 7 from me. Sorry, Fantano, you've got a really solid way of rating things, so I'm just going to ape that if you don't mind, as if you're fucking listening or ever going to listen to me. Like I said, the movie had such a level of hype and preliminary hatred from people that it was never going to live up to those standards. And at the end of the day, I think all it was really trying to be was a dumb little diversion of a film that had the sole ambition of trying to integrate pre-existing real-world subcultures into a mainstream narrative. And it does succeed at that. It's not spectacular at all in terms of how much it accomplishes that. To give credit where credit's due, again, it takes itself seriously enough that it's not, meaningless as a viewing experience, but it also has those moments where it acknowledges this is a dumb super crossover and we're gonna have fun with it. Ultimately, I think in a few years' time, this could easily become a cute little cult film for people who just want something that's flashy and relevant to that sect of pop culture. About 30 minutes from the end, it dawned on me that it is very much kind of the Wizard of this generation. For those who don't remember The Wizard, if you don't watch like AVGN or any other amount of people who would have glorified that movie from the 80s, it's Hollywood trying to appeal to and acknowledge video game culture. What made that movie a cult classic was the fact that in a lot of ways, it was just a commercial to the point where it had a reveal of Super Mario Bros. 3 at the end, but it also showed like a corporate lack of understanding of the intricacies of how video games worked at the time, as simple as they were. Like, they were still considered a toy at the time. With this, there's a lot more respect and a lot more knowingness of what video games and online interaction is. We've had several decades to get to the point where most people have somewhat of an understanding of how that could work. And luckily, Spielberg has always been at the forefront of technological advancement in terms of film and culture. So if we were going to get another movie like that, where the big studios tried to make something for gamers specifically, I'm glad it at least turned out this solid, this okay. And, I'm 24. So whatever magic I might have experienced, even though there were definitely a couple of moments, the Spielbergian magic that I got into. If I were a kid, I would love this. If I was one of those Minecraft, Logic Studio tutorial with iMovie, Roblox, Tide Pod generation, I would probably really dig the crap out of this. Like, I love Hook. I said that in the other video, and that's not necessarily a masterpiece, but it's peppered with moments of brilliance, I guess. And I was exposed to it at a young enough age that I hold that near and dear to my heart as a piece of nostalgia to watch. Of course, it also had Robin Williams, and he was there like as the through line for the movie, and he's fantastic in that. And the real acting highlights of this movie are definitely supporting roles, unfortunately. But yeah, overall, I'd say it's an okay movie. It's a fun time at the theater. If you want to spend money for ticket price, like, go for it. I think you'll have a good evening. Just, get a good bag of popcorn, get a big old sody pop, and get you some Junior Mints. And yeah, it'll do its job of feeding your eye holes while you're filling your mouth holes with junk that's going to make you nauseous when you're trying to sleep later that night. So yeah, that's my quick little relatively spoiler-free review of Ready Player One. If you guys would be interested in me doing this sort of thing, I definitely have considered it. I have some shit I unfortunately need to really get rolling on outside of the YouTube channel, namely work and personal project related things. So I can't necessarily guarantee the next time I'm going to be able to make like a full video like my last one, but I do desperately need to diversify my output on here. So yeah, if you want more quick movie reviews, whether they're things I see in theaters or something that I pull off of my shelf, let me know in the comments or something. Assuming you even, watch this. I have no idea how long this is going to be. But in any case, hope y'all have a good day, and I'm going to edit this up and hang out with dogs. One down there.